Hi, I'm Jacob Rigdenhill.
And I'm Jeffrey Graber, and our podcast today is on the Reformation and its effects throughout time. On October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther embarked on a Reformation which would have ripple effects on the Church for centuries to come. Nailing the 95 Theses to the church door of Wittenberg, Luther set off a series of events that ultimately led to the Protestant Church separating from the Roman Catholic Church. Professor of Theology at Dort College, Dr. Justin Bailey inquires.
He was one of many movements within the late medieval church that were trying to reform the practice of the medieval church, which had become very fixated on power. There was corruption. There was a guy going around selling something called indulgences, which meant that if you had a family member who had died and was in purgatory, which is the middle place between heaven and hell, you could pay to take years of their time off purgatory. So those are the sort of abuses that Martin Luther was responding to. And he was wanting to get back to sort of the simplicity and the clarity of the gospel, the teaching of the apostles, and called for the church to be reformed.
The Roman Catholic Church had become corrupt in an endless striving of power, requiring more and more money to pay off ludicrous extravagancies such as St. Peter's Basilica. Pope Leo X started issuing indulgences. These indulgences were small parchments of paper that were sold to the common people in return for salvation for deceased relatives. Because of this, Luther did not give up in his pursuit to turn the Catholic Church from its directed course. Throughout the Reformation, new ideologies and theological ideas sprouted and largely defined the Protestant faith to this day. Reverend John Lee of Bethel CRC in Sioux Center stated,
Sola fide, by faith alone, sola gratia, and grace alone, solus Christus, and Christ alone, sola Deo gloria, to God's glory alone, and sola scriptura, by the scripture alone. So those kind of five things, you can unpack each of them, but they were really a call for the church to go back to the basics understanding of Christianity and to strip away some of the verbiage and power that the church had assembled around it.
John Calvin, a major reformer from France, set up a church in Geneva, Switzerland. It was here where he created the Institutes of the Christian Religion in 1536. Dr. Bailey discusses on the topic.
And then Calvin, John Calvin, who is in Geneva, Switzerland, sort of established this Protestant home for refugees from persecution, from Catholic persecution because of the Reformation. And he was a great systematizer, wrote his Institutes of Christian Theology, which is still probably the most important theological work written.
Calvin and his followers created a sect of Protestantism now known as the Reformed faith, to which millions of people belong to this day.
Reverend Lee says,
You look at, you had, at the time of the Reformation, a couple of major church movements. There was the Eastern Orthodox, the Coptic, and the Roman Catholic. And so in the western part of Europe, it was all Roman Catholic. Now there are, by some estimates, there's all kinds of estimates about how many denominations there are, 30,000, 50,000. And so certainly the fracturing of God's church, the sort of distrust and disunity that's resulted. I mentioned politically the 30 Years' War, and really World War I, a whole bunch of European wars fought between Christian nations would have not been as likely under another way. So I would say the disunity of the church and the political religious persecution that we saw afterwards were certainly bad consequences.
although the Reformation was ultimately a beneficial and necessary occurrence, not all of the effects were positive. The map of Europe drastically changed due to the alliances forming over religious differences. Each nation was forced to choose a side in the theological war occurring between both sides. Multitudes of denominations began to form over the years, creating disunity over non-vital differences in beliefs. Beginning as a unity of believers seeking change in the Catholic Church, it has seemingly devolved into seeking out the contrasts rather than the similarities in each other.
In closing, Pastor Lee states,
Even the Catholic Church, if you look at Vatican II, has recognized that much of what the Reformation was trying to do needed to happen. The Reformation wasn't trying to revitalize the church or change the church. It was really trying to go back to the beginnings and to call the church to faithfulness, which is why it's a reformation, not a revolution. And that needed to happen and continues to need to happen.
Although difficult, complex, and sometimes straight out ugly, the Reformation was a necessary step for the church in order to return to the roots of Christianity.